love that.
I know, we both done it, chicken.
Welcome to the Bear Collective podcast, where we meet you at the edge of what you know and dance with you into the depths of what you don't in all things personal development, relationships, and lifestyle. We empower you to take what you need and leave what you don't. Thank you for listening, watching, and subscribing. Now let's get into today's episode. Yes. I do not know where that came from.
You are not like a singer or a super vocal, especially on a
Not in
podcast
public.
platform. Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Behind closed doors. When I actually mentioned that in a previous podcast, I have a lovely neighbor who listens. Shout out if you're listening. And she sent me a message and she said, I'm going to be listening for you singing from now on. And I was like, that's really cool. Like, you know, that's brought that moment in.
There's something about being at home or like in the car that brings about this center in the shower, I think.
Yes. Well, the acoustics are so good in the
you sound so much better.
Sometimes
I think that's where so many people get fooled onto these reality shows of thinking that they sound amazing because they're all singing in the shower with the amazing acoustics.
Look, we can blame my husband. He was the one that told me I was good. So if you hear me now, that's why. I hope this doesn't get loads of comments that are like, you're terrible, never do it again.
Hey, I sang Bad Boys.
You did.
But I owned it.
And power to you.
Yeah.
Power to you for it.
Play with life.
We need
Can't
play.
take it too seriously.
We need play. And we need play. Segue.
You're giving me the finger here.
Sorry.
Very sharp and pointy. It is. That's your magic wand. You're about to weave some magic and some words.
Thank you. That's such a good, much more like me Harry Potter based reference. Thank you. Good segue to dive into like, yeah, what we want to touch on a little bit today is like tension. And, you know, play can be so good for tension, but let's not dive that far yet.
Let's not get into the pleasure of tension.
Oh, are you sure we can't just sit there the whole time? I'm going to need that soon. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Stop dancing. Okay, I'm back. I'm not back.
Deep breaths.
Okay, I can't breathe. No. Okay, so we want to talk about this. We've lost Larissa, everybody. It's my fault. Oh, I'll take that. We want to talk about tension, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it can sound like. I know tension in the body, great one to go into what it feels like. I mean, how many of you are sitting there right now with your shoulders hunched up above your, like almost to your ears and not even noticing?
Relaxed.
Yeah, pay attention. Pay attention.
And that's where I think most people feel a lot of tension. They feel their stress in their shoulders. They're carrying a lot, right? It's carrying that tension, carrying the weight. They're tensing up in their shoulders, around their neck and their throats.
Yeah. But a lot around what it sounds like, and we were talking about before, you know, tension can be quiet versus loud. So go into that a bit more for us.
Yeah, if I think about tension, like where we kind of more learn about it is in and through communication. We often think of tension as conflicts or fights or arguments that happens in communication, again, intimate relationships, workplaces, friendships, neighbors, whatever it might be, like in the car when you're driving and someone cuts you off, there's a micro moment of tension there that you experience. But when I think about tension and kind of what brought us to kind of talk about this topic, it was where do we actually learn it from, and how is it role model to us? Because you're not born knowing what tension is.
No,
you learn it and you develop it. So we learn that from our caregivers, from our parents. And when we think about like loud expressions and more silent expressions, I think about obviously my parents, and I think I've shared before on the podcast, you know, having a father who had an alcohol addiction on his side came with a very loud expression, and that caused tension in the household. And when you're dealing with someone who has like an addiction, when they come home, you're walking on eggshells. That's the feeling. There is this tension of, where is this going to go? Is this person going to explode? Is it going to be happy and calm? Like what's that environment? And that can take place in when you've had a fight with your partner, and the next day, like you come home and if it hasn't been resolved, there is a tension in the air. And so tension can also be stress, it can be anxiousness, it can be nervousness about a future experience.
Yeah, it just makes me think straight away like into our nervous system. And you know, I suppose like, yeah, like our sympathetic response and just being in that stress response and holding that in our bodies, and that can come out then in different ways, as well as, and again we've touched on this in previous episodes, but yeah, then the stories we create in our minds about what we're experiencing, that tension. We might create stories around that and really struggle with that, or we might try and pretend it doesn't exist and suppress it.
And I think that's the purpose of this episode, is really to become aware of, where are you feeling tension in your life? Where are you holding tension in your body? Where are you maybe suppressing something, or even expressing that tension, where again, a loud expression of tension is not necessarily good or bad. Neither is a quiet expression of just holding and suppressing it is neither good or bad. It's a bit of a mix of both, like hot and cold water. You need a nice warm bath, right? You can't just have hot water. I mean, I know this whole cold therapy thing. We're not going down there for this analogy. You need the mix of both, again, to find that middle ground and to find a healthy way to process through that tension.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like if we go back to what you said about where we learn what to do with tension, and really wanting to focus on that for people, you know, our nervous systems, again, like they will get very comfortable and feel very safe in a certain level of tension. And that can be learnt or, you know, created, I suppose, for want of a better word, within that home environment where we have grown up. So based on like, you know, your dad, and for example my dad was very similar, having mental health issues. He was very expressive with his tension in an unhealthy way. You know, would yell and, you know, get angry and cross and those sorts of things. If you see that enough, that becomes your normal, and then you end up searching for it. And then on the flip side of that, I know, like, you know, you might have the opposite, the other caregiver, if there are two in the household, being, you know, the very opposite of that, expressive, and they might go into that really quiet, passive expression of their own tension, that suppression of their own tension.
Correct.
You know, something else we've talked about before, like sweeping under the rug, or, you know, people pleasing, or, you know, just shutting down completely and withdrawing.
Again, it's that, how do you do tension when you're feeling tension on your side? How do you express it? And then when you're feeling tension from somebody, so like our environments with our fathers, you know, when they're in their emotional states, they're dysregulated, and they're expressing that out in unhealthy ways, and we're feeling and we're holding that tension in our body. How are we actually receiving the tension? How are we actually processing it?
It takes me back, like I remember my dad and I having one particular fight when I was in like my senior years of high school. And thank God I had my license by this time. But we got into like one of these moments of tension. And he, you know, he went to his typical way of doing that, and I was like, I can't go home, like I don't want to go home, I don't want to deal with that. And so I learned, you know, I'm just house hopping my friends' houses for the next few nights until it's time, maybe until it's safe to go home, because he's like calmed down and we can actually have a conversation about it.
And I think something that you touched on, a really good analogy there that you mentioned before, is like everybody in their home has a different set point. So if you imagine a thermometer with a, you know, a heating and a cooling set point, it's like, you obviously knew that the set point was like, the temperature was like 60 degrees, you needed it to kind of cool down to a nice, 25 degrees before you came home.
Yeah.
That's how you felt that the tension needed to be regulated in order for it to feel safe to come home.
Yes.
However, the dynamics that, each and every single person's household grew up in, those temperature set points can be set at a different level. And this is linking into where you're talking about the nervous system. Some people might be regulated for that dysfunction, that level of tension, for it to be normalized. And that feels like their normal set point, when actually it's not healthy. And we only sometimes experience this by when we, grow up and we move out of home and we go out into big bad world or big bright world. And we experience other people's dynamics and relationships, and we can see, oh, that's like, there's no fights in this family, they actually communicate with each other, that's really healthy. Like, how does that happen? And why didn't I experience that? How do you
even do that?
How do you even do that? Like, you guys seem to just support each other and be there for each other, or conflict resolution really, really well. So I think coming into awareness of and getting curious on maybe things where the temperature was normalized at a certain level that's actually unhealthy.
Where it is still tense.
Not wrong, not bad. It's just that's what the experience was. And maybe that's also playing out in your relationship, because when, for example, as we both had, fathers that were, kind of very loud in that expression, you can either be attracted to that in your relationships because it's perceived on the surface as like confidence and like strength when you first see someone, and then when you have conflict with them, they get really, really loud. And you're like, oof, that reminds me of my dad. But there's a certain attraction to the loudness because it feels familiar.
Yes.
Or you can go the polar opposite way and go to somebody who's really quiet and non-reactive, and then that's sometimes where you can have conflict of like, maybe there's no sexual polarity, or you feel kind of like a bit of boredom, or it's too calm and you want to create chaos to create what has been normalized as your temperature thermostat. You go out creating the tension and trying to find it places. Absolutely. Just to bring that temperature back to whatever your experience was when you were, what you grew up in, what your foundations were. What you used to, what was normalized for you. So the other place is that when we are going through this, we're also feeling this in our body, which can often be a sign that, hey, especially if it's kind of like in the shoulders and in that throat area where we're carrying a lot of, the perceived stress, that the tension, it's actually an indication of something that we need to speak our truth on. Right? Because the mind and the body is so connected. So when we're feeling tension in our body and noticing that, and that's the simple way, feeling those shoulders are tight, the traps? I don't know. Trap. It is at the back, are really, really tight. That's traps. Just actually putting your mind there and kind of thinking about, where is this tension coming from? Where am I feeling tension in my life? Where am I feeling tension in my relationships or my workplace? What's feeling really unresolved? And getting curious on that, and then taking action on what needs to come from that. So that might look like a conversation saying, hey, I'm feeling like there's some tension between us. I can't quite place my finger on it. Are you feeling, is any of this making sense? Does this feel similar for you? And seeing what comes out of that. Because that can be really connecting, and it can relieve that tension that you're feeling, in your shoulders, in your throat. It's almost like you can carry around those conversations that you need to have. And then when you have them, it's just a complete release. And you let go of that energy, and life feels so much lighter. But anywhere we're holding a kind of tension in our body, or when we're noticing or feeling stress, anxiety, again, just as other forms of the way that we experience tension, it's a place for us to really get curious in ourselves. It's our physical form giving us data of being like, hey, I'm knocking at the door. There's something that we need to learn here,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
a skill that we need to develop. So really leaning into it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, I mean, I want to bring up something that you mentioned before, sexual tension. Because that's not necessarily a conversation you need to have.
No, but I feel like that's an experience that people just know in relationships. Either in relationships, or it's a chemical thing that you can experience, obviously, in first meeting people. I don't know, attraction to people in movie screens is kind of like,
It's that chemistry.
Yeah,
it's that chemistry. But that's whenever someone says tension, you know, I think about that, because I think, oh, that's like a really, you know, easy tension to identify with, perhaps. At least for me, like, and I think it's one that we have all seen in popular media, and but it can be stress related too. You know, I could go down a whole pathway about like, are we using sex for the right thing? But I'm not going to go there.
No, but there is, so sexual tension obviously has, you know, very easy to determine that there's pleasure associated to that. Where we talk about the other side, which feels like painful tension, like the discomfort of having an uncomfortable conversation, the actual outcome once you resolve it is pleasure. That's that energy release that we have where you do feel lighter. It's just what we associate pleasure with tends to be more sexualized. Yeah, definitely. But once you release the pain and the tension that you're holding, and pain, I don't mean it has to like physically, your arm has to be like throbbing and hurting, you know, for it to be pain. There's emotional kind of discomfort there. There's avoidance there. There's kind of you're avoiding, you're not wanting to go there, you're feeling anxious about seeing someone, you're feeling stressed that you're having to go and do this particular meeting at work. There's tension in that. There is pain coming through. Yeah, like my mind then goes to like people who know they've got like a, you know, a review at work or something like that, you know, stepping into that environment, and, you know, you might make a bit of small talk and some really uncomfortable jokes to try and ease some of the tension. Yeah. Humor is such a go-to for a lot of people to use to diffuse tension. Yeah. It can also be a mask for covering up pain rather than actually resolving the underlying cause for the tension. Yeah. So you can think about that in relationship dynamics, where like if you came home to your dad after those 2 days and 3 days of being on friends' couches, and you just like laid down a joke. Laid down a joke, like you're still trying to diffuse the tension and avoid it through humor. And you're trying to escape to that pleasure before actually dealing with the, hey dad, we need to have a talk about, you know, this part was uncomfortable, or I said this because of this, and this is how I feel, and this is what I need from you. Yeah, honestly, like so many of us just don't learn how to do that. Like we have to, take messy action. And really learn that skill through action. Yeah. And I think it's asking yourself the question, how could I approach this conversation? How could I approach, you know, this interaction from a healthy lens? What's a healthy way? And also identifying what's unhealthy, what hasn't actually been working, because you've got plenty of data where you've had conflicts, where you've had fights, where you've been on the receiving end of those things, where you've felt that kind of like tension, that uncomfortableness, that you can even kind of make a list of, okay, these are all the things that are really easy to find that are unhealthy in the way that I'm coming into the conversation, or what it feels like to receive. And then therefore looking at that and going, okay, what would be a healthy way to do that same thing? What would a healthy way, or a more comfortable, more safe way be able to experience that tension, that conflict, or bringing up that conversation? Yeah. And I'm wondering now, like, unlike, you know, when we're really
emotionally dysregulated. Like we are at like, you know, like I guess with that example with dad, like if he was at a 60 in his thermometer, at what point can you still feel the tension and navigate it there and then? You know, I wonder what the, you know, what the limit is, because I know when we go to a certain level on that thermometer, like our prefrontal cortex shuts down and we're coming purely from our emotion brain, and we can't have those logical, you know, calm conversations where they're productive, or it would be very, very forced and potentially fake because, you know, we're still so heightened. Yeah, I'm really wondering with tension specifically, can we have those conversations in the moment, even though there's tension? And I think, I mean, for me, the first thing that comes to mind is like, yeah, it's great to call it out. I think it's really important if you're sitting there across from a boss or a friend and it feels awkward to call it out, because that level of tension, you know, I don't know exactly what number that is. It would be different for everyone, but I guess it's knowing that there is a level of tension that you can still safely navigate in the moment.
Well, that level of vulnerability automatically takes some of the tension out.
Yeah.
When you give vulnerability to say, I can feel the tension in the room, I can cut it with a knife, I'm feeling like, I just want to let you know, I'm feeling super awkward right now.
Yeah.
That can humanize you, and that will take the temperature down. But you also said something so profound then, which is this productive? And just having that check-in with yourself when you're having the conversation, if you can notice the temperature going up because you're getting heated, it's feeling more like a fight, it's getting more into attack, you can feel more of that dysregulation, then the temperature's rising. If you can feel that someone's kind of avoiding, also the temperature could be going so low, it's getting like cold, it's getting freezing. That's also another type of your temperature is not regulated. Yeah. So a great check-in that you just kind of alluded to was, you know, checking in the moment. Is this feeling productive or is this feeling unproductive? If it's feeling unproductive, it might be saying, can we take a pause? Let's come back and set a time, set a day, you know, so that it gives safety to both people and time to process, hey, we're going to come back and connect on this, you know, and take that breath, take that beat, and then come back so that it's more productive. Yeah, because I've even heard of people having those more productive conversations, but then no, and then what movie is that from?
I have no idea. Yeah. Go you go. But where like it's really interesting, they've come into like a conversation and been really vulnerable and said like, I feel like this is really awkward. Do you feel that too? And they've said, no, it's fine. Yeah. But then the person's observed their other person's behavior change. Yeah. And I'm like, what do you do then? Like, what do you do when you've called it out? You are, you know, working on being vulnerable and, you know, you're trying to navigate this tension, but the other person's not willing.
I would say that that's where it comes into self-acceptance, that you have to realize that everybody is on their own journey, and the person that you're sitting across from having that conversation in this particular example, they're not ready to experience that. However, do not let it detract from you doing that and showing up as your most authentic self, and also developing that skill, because then you become a role model for that behavior that people kind of look up to. You leading that, then you become safe, you become trusting, and that person may come back to you in a couple months' time, a couple weeks' time, a couple days' time, a year's time, and be like, that was a conversation that really changed my life when you did that, when you showed that level of vulnerability. And yeah, I was awkward in that time, but I didn't want to admit that to you, right? So that's self-regulating in that moment. Not to need that validation or to feel exactly the same as that person in that moment to make your experience valid. Yeah, absolutely. Authentic. Yeah. It just popped in. I was like, oh yeah, this relates. We love when it just pops in.
I like when my brain's working. Like
Latter stages of pregnancy. People.
Oh, third trimester. She's not what she used to be. Oh my goodness. She's got a very short window in the morning.
And with that short window,
Yeah.
we will leave that episode.
Let's close it.
Yeah.
Help me.
She's feeling a different kind of tension.
Yeah.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Leave a comment, drop into our DMs on Instagram at @thebearcollective_. Thank you for viewing, watching, and subscribing.
We will see you next week.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.